January 1848, a man named James Marshall finds a few tiny pieces of gold in a river in California. Tiny pieces, barely anything. He almost walked right past them. Within a year, 1 year, 300,000 people drop everything and head west. They leave their jobs, their homes, their families. Some of them die on the way. Most of them never find a single ounce of gold. And yet it was one of the most important moments in American history. It was madness. Beautiful, extraordinary, completely American madness. And tonight, I'm going to tell you the whole story. Get comfortable. Pull up those covers. Put the phone down, after this. Put it down after this, because what I'm about to tell you is a story that most people think they know and almost nobody actually understands. The Gold Rush, 1849. The 49ers. You've heard the name, you've seen the movies, you think you know what happened, you don't. Not the real story. Not the part that changes how you see America. My name is Donald J. Trump, 45th and 47th President of the United States. I know a thing or two about gold. I put it on buildings. I put it on interiors. Some people say I like gold too much. I say there's no such thing. But the gold I'm going to tell you about tonight, that gold didn't just make a few men rich. It built a state. It changed a country. It launched the American economy into a century of dominance that the world had never seen before and hasn't seen since. $750,000 worth of gold was pulled out of California in 1848 alone. By the time it was over, billions of dollars. Adjusted for today, we're talking about a number so large it's hard to even say out loud. And it started with one man one morning and a handful of flakes in a cold mountain river. Close your eyes if you want, I'll take it from here. Act 1, the man who started it all. His name was James Wilson Marshall, and if history were fair, and I can tell you from personal experience, history is not always fair. James Marshall would be one of the most celebrated names in American memory. He was a carpenter. A quiet man, not a dreamer, not an adventurer, not someone looking to change the world. He was a craftsman, hired by a man named John Sutter to build a sawmill on the American River in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. Now California in January 1848 is barely even American. The Mexican-American War has just ended, literally just ended. 9 days after Marshall's discovery, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed, officially transferring California to the United States. 9 days. The timing is almost impossible to believe. So Marshall is out there in the cold on the morning of January 24th. He's checking the water channel below the mill, a channel they dug to control the flow of the river. And he looks down and he sees something shiny in the water, sitting on the bedrock. He picks it up. It's soft. It's heavy for its size. He bites it. That's actually what you do to test gold. You bite it because gold is soft enough to dent under tooth pressure. It dents. He shows it to the other workers. Everyone gets excited, then cautious. Don't say anything, they agree. Let's keep this quiet until we know what we have. They couldn't keep it quiet. Nobody could have kept that quiet. Within weeks, word is out. The news spreads through trading posts and ships and whisper networks that move faster than anyone in 1848 can quite understand. And the world, the entire world, begins to move toward California. Act 2, the man who lost everything. Here's the part of the story that nobody tells you at school, and it's important, so listen closely. John Sutter, the man who owned the land, the man who hired Marshall to build the mill, the man on whose property the gold was found, John Sutter should have been the richest man in America. He owned the land. He had the claim. He was sitting on top of one of the greatest fortunes in history. He lost everything. When the news broke and the gold rush began, thousands of men poured onto his property, not asking permission, not paying rent, not recognizing boundaries. They just came. They camped on his land, pulled up his crops, slaughtered his cattle, tore apart his farms. His workers abandoned him to go pan for gold. His entire agricultural operation, which had been genuinely successful, one of the best ranches in California, collapsed overnight. The men he needed to keep it running were gone, shovels in hand, heading to the river. Sutter tried to fight it legally. He filed claims, petitioned the courts, argued that the land was his. The courts were sympathetic but powerless. There were simply too many people. The law couldn't keep up with the flood. By the early 1850s, John Sutter was bankrupt. He spent the rest of his life petitioning Congress for compensation. He never received a dollar. He died in 1880, still fighting, still waiting. James Marshall didn't do much better. He filed mining claims, tried to profit from his discovery, but other miners chased him off every claim he staked. He couldn't hold ground. Everywhere he went, the crowds followed, not to celebrate him, but to push him aside and take what he'd found. He made almost nothing from the gold he discovered. He ended his days doing odd jobs and selling his autograph to tourists who found his story interesting enough to pay a few coins for a signature. The two men who started the gold rush, the man who found the gold and the man who owned the land, both died essentially broke. Think about that. Really think about it. The people who get rich in a gold rush, and I mean this in every sense, literal and metaphorical, are rarely the ones who find the gold. That lesson is woven all the way through this story, and it's one of the most important business lessons in American history. Here's something that genuinely surprises us every time we check this channel's analytics. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now are not subscribed. 90%. We just covered how the two men who literally started the gold rush both ended up broke while the country around them exploded into wealth. That is exactly the kind of American history that most people never hear, and it needs to reach further. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, share this with one person who loves American history and doesn't know the full story. Now let's continue. Act 3, the ones who actually got rich. So if Marshall and Sutter didn't get rich, who did? A man named Samuel Brannan, and his story is almost more fascinating than the gold itself. Brannan was a newspaper publisher and merchant in San Francisco. When he heard about the gold discovery, he did something brilliant, something that honestly I respect enormously as a businessman. He didn't grab a pan and head to the river. He went and bought up every pickaxe, every shovel, every pan, every piece of mining equipment he could find in the entire region. He bought out every hardware store, every supply shop, everything. Then, and this is the genius part, he walked through the streets of San Francisco waving a bottle of gold dust and shouting, "Gold, gold, gold from the American river." He created the panic. He manufactured the rush. And then he sold supplies to everyone who came running. Within a few months, Brannan was pulling in thousands of dollars a day. He became the first California millionaire, the first before the 49ers even arrived, before the real rush even started. The principle is simple and it is eternal. In a gold rush, sell shovels. Levi Strauss understood this. He came to California not to mine, but to sell canvas goods. He ended up making pants, durable pants for miners who needed something that wouldn't tear. Blue Jeans. The company still exists today. Over 150 years later, doing billions of dollars in business annually worldwide, Philip Armour, the meatpacking king, he came to California, looked around and realized miners needed to eat. He didn't mind. He sold meat. He made a fortune and used it to build one of the great American food companies of the 19th century. Henry Wells and William Fargo saw that all these people needed to send money home and store what they earned. They didn't pan for gold. They built a bank, Wells Fargo, still operating, still one of the largest banks in the United States, born from the gold rush. The merchants, the suppliers, the service providers, they built the lasting wealth of the gold rush. The miners mostly went home with dirt on their hands and holes in their pockets. That's not cynical, that's real. And understanding it tells you more about how economies actually work than any textbook ever could. Act 4, the journey west. But let's talk about the 49ers themselves, because even if most of them didn't strike it rich, what they did, the sheer physical act of getting to California, was one of the most remarkable things Americans have ever done. In 1849, there is no transcontinental railroad. It hasn't been built yet. Getting from the East Coast to California means one of three things. Option 1, sail around Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. 18,000 miles, 5 to 8 months at sea, storms so violent that ships are smashed to pieces, waves the size of buildings, cold so bitter that ropes freeze solid. Dozens of ships were lost on this route, hundreds of men drowned. Option 2, sail to Panama, cross the jungle on foot or a mule, 50 miles of dense, disease-ridden jungle, and pick up another ship on the Pacific side. Faster, but the jungle was full of cholera and malaria. Men who survived the ocean crossing died in the mud before they even reached California. Option 3, overland, the California Trail, 2,000 miles across prairie, desert, and mountain. You pack your belongings into a wagon or you walk alongside one and you go through Kansas, through Nebraska, through Wyoming, over the Rockies, through the Nevada desert, where the heat is so intense that wagon wheels crack and oxen collapse, then up and over the Sierra Nevada, where one wrong timing decision could trap you in a snowstorm and kill every person in your party. The Donner Party that happened just 2 years before the gold rush on the same mountain pass, people still remembered it. They went anyway. 300,000 people went anyway. That tells you something about the human hunger for opportunity, the willingness to risk everything, genuinely everything, your life, your family's lives, for a chance, not a guarantee, a chance. That spirit, the willingness to bet everything on a vision of what might be, that is American, deeply, irreducibly American. It didn't start with the gold rush, and it didn't end there, but the gold rush is where it burned brightest. Act 5, what they found when they got there. So these 300,000 people arrive, and what do they find? Chaos. Beautiful, energetic, lawless, magnificent chaos. San Francisco in 1849 is unlike any city that has ever existed. It grows from a small settlement of about 1,000 people to a city of 25,000 in less than a year. Buildings go up overnight, literally overnight. Entire neighborhoods are constructed in days. The streets are mud. The prices are insane. A single egg, $1. In 1849 money, that's roughly $35 today. For one egg, a plate of food, $10. A hotel room, if you could find one, hundreds of dollars a night. People sleep on ships anchored in the harbor. There are so many ships abandoned by crews who jumped off to go mine that the harbor is packed with them, wall to wall, like a floating city. Crime is rampant because there's almost no law. California isn't even officially a state, yet it becomes one in 1850. In the mining camps, disputes are settled personally. Fights break out constantly. Theft is epidemic. Men who struck gold were robbed before they could even spend it, and yet people loved it. The accounts from people who were there describe an electric atmosphere, an energy, a feeling that anything was possible, that the normal rules didn't apply, that the world was being remade from scratch every single day. That energy, that wild creative energy, attracted the most interesting people on earth. Entrepreneurs, gamblers, lawyers, criminals, doctors, preachers, con artists, genuine geniuses, people running from something, people running towards something, people who had nothing to lose, and people who were betting everything they had, all in one place, all at the same time, all chasing the same dream. The population of California goes from roughly 14,000 non-indigenous people in 1848 to over 300,000 by 1855. The fastest population growth in American history before or since. The state doesn't just grow, it erupts like a volcano. All that energy, all that ambition compressed into one place and then released at once. Act 6, the gold itself. Let's talk about the actual gold for a minute, because the numbers are staggering. In 1848, the year Marshall finds his flakes, before the rush really starts, about $700,000 worth of gold is pulled out of California. In 1849, the first real year of the rush, $10 million, 1,850, $41 million, 1,852. The peak year, $81 million in gold in a single year, pulled out of rivers and mountains by men with pans and shovels and picks. Total gold extracted during the entire gold rush period, estimates range from $500 million to over $1 billion in 19th century money. In today's value, we are talking about numbers in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Most of it flowed east into the American economy, into banks, into businesses, into the industrialization that made the United States the dominant economic power of the 20th century. The gold rush didn't just build California, it capitalized America. It gave the country the financial foundation to build railroads, factories, cities, to fight a civil war and survive it, to industrialize at a pace that left Europe standing still, watching in disbelief. The gold funded the future. And most people who watch videos about the gold rush never hear that part of the story. Act 7, the people the history books forget. Now I want to tell you about some people who don't always make it into the textbooks, because history, when it's told right, is everyone's story. The Chinese miners, tens of thousands of Chinese immigrants came to California during the gold rush. They called it Gamsan Gold Mountain. They were skilled, disciplined, hardworking. They often worked claims that white miners had abandoned as played out and found gold because they were patient, because they were methodical. They were also treated terribly. California passed the foreign miners tax specifically to drive them out. They were attacked, their camps were burned, and yet they stayed, they worked. They built communities in San Francisco's Chinatown, one of the oldest and most enduring in the country that exists to this day. When the Transcontinental Railroad was built in the 1860s, it was largely built by Chinese laborers doing the most dangerous work, drilling through granite, handling explosives, working in conditions that killed men regularly. The railroad that bound the nation together was built in no small part by the same men who came for gold and were told they weren't welcome. The women of the gold rush are another chapter that gets skipped. Women ran boarding houses, laundries, restaurants, businesses that the mining camps desperately needed. Some of them made more money than the miners. Mary Ellen Pleasant, a black woman who arrived in San Francisco in 1852, became one of the wealthiest and most influential people in California. She used her wealth and her connections to fund abolitionist causes, including John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. The gold rush gave her the platform to fight for something much bigger than gold. The full story of the gold rush is not just the story of white men with pans in a river. It is the story of every kind of American, drawn by the same dream, treated very differently, and finding ways to survive and build anyway. That's complicated and real. And it makes the story bigger, not smaller. Act 8, What the Gold Rush Built. California became a state in 1850, fastest track to statehood in American history at that point. The population was so large, so fast, that there was no option. You had to bring it in. San Francisco became one of the great cities of the world. Within 20 years of Marshall's discovery, it had a stock exchange, banks, universities, theaters, newspapers. It had the trappings of a civilization that had taken other American cities a century to develop. That's what happens when you compress everything. When you pour ambition into a container too small to hold it, it explodes upward. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, was essentially a child of the gold rush. The federal government financed it. The will to build it came from the need to connect California, this exploding gold-funded state, to the rest of the country. When the Golden Spike was driven at Promontory Summit in Utah, linking east to west, it was the gold rush's final, lasting gift to America. One railroad, coast to coast, a country bound together by iron and will and gold. The agriculture that built California into the most productive food state in the nation, all those farms, all those orchards, all that wine country. It was financed by gold rush capital. The people who made money selling supplies to miners invested in land, in farms, in the future. The gold didn't stay in the ground, it multiplied. And here's the connection most people never make. Silicon Valley sits exactly where the gold rush happened. The same mountains, the same rivers, the same culture of come here with an idea, a little capital, and a willingness to risk everything. The venture capital model, the startup culture, the tolerance for failure in pursuit of the next big thing, that is the gold rush mentality, updated for the digital age. Apple, Google, Intel, all of them built on the same hills where men once swung picks at rock. The 49ers and the tech founders have more in common than either of them would probably admit. Same hills, same hunger, same beautiful American madness. Act 9, The Lesson That Lasts. Here's what I want you to take from this, because every great story, when it's told right, teaches you something true. 300,000 people made that journey west. Most of them didn't find gold. Most of them came home poorer than they left, or didn't come home at all. By any individual measure, the gold rush was a failure for the vast majority of people who participated in it, and yet it was one of the most successful events in American history, because what those 300,000 people built, the infrastructure, the economy, the culture, the state of California itself, was worth infinitely more than the gold they were looking for. The dream drew them. What they built when they got there was the real treasure. I think about that a lot as someone who has built things, buildings, businesses, a political movement. I know that the dream and the reality don't always match. Sometimes you go looking for one thing and you find something completely different, something better, something you couldn't have planned. The 49ers went looking for gold, and they built the most economically powerful state and the most powerful nation on earth. That is not a failure. That is not even close to a failure. The critics said it was chaos. They said it was lawless and dangerous and unsustainable. They were right that it was chaotic. They were completely wrong about what it would become. Sound familiar? The people who run toward opportunity, who pack up their lives and cross 2,000 miles of desert on a bet, they are not reckless. They are the builders, the dreamers who do, the ones who look at a mountain and see a railroad instead of an obstacle. America has always been full of those people. The gold rush just put them all in one place at the same time and let them run. What would you have done? Would you have packed up your family and headed west on the chance, not the certainty, the chance of finding something better? Drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know, because the answer to that question tells you a lot about who you are. Act 10, winding down. I want you to start relaxing now. Whatever is weighing on you tonight, set it down just for a little while. Set it down, take a breath in, hold it, and slowly let it out. Picture California, not the California of traffic and headlines. The California underneath all of that, the real California, the one that was there in 1849 and is still there if you go looking. The Sierra Nevada mountains in early morning, the peaks still capped with snow, even in spring, pink and orange in the first light. Below the snow line, pine forests so thick and tall they block out the sky, and below that the foothills rolling and golden, covered in dry grass that catches the sun like something precious. And cutting through those foothills, the American River. Cold, clear, fast-moving. You can hear it from a quarter mile away, the sound of water over rocks, steady, constant, indifferent to history. James Marshall stood beside that river one cold January morning and looked down and changed the world, and the river just kept running, same as it had for 10,000 years before him, same as it does today. There's something peaceful in that. The world changes, men make history, empires rise and fall, and the river just keeps moving. Breathe in again. Somewhere in those foothills there is still gold. There really is. You can still go out there today with a pan and find flakes in the creeks, not enough to retire on. But real gold sitting in real water, the same way it sat there before Marshall found it, waiting patiently, unbothered. The hills are quiet now. The camps are gone. The chaos has settled into farms and towns and highways. But if you stand very still in those hills on a clear day and you let yourself feel the history of the place, you can almost hear it. The sound of 300,000 people arriving at once, the clang of picks on rock, the laughter and the arguing and the praying and the singing, all those dreams concentrated in one place. Most of them didn't pan out the way the dreamers hoped, but the dreaming itself, that was the point. That was always the point. Breathe out slowly, feel your body getting heavier, feel your thoughts getting quieter. The gold is still in those hills. The dream is still in this country. You know what I love about the gold rush? It's the most American story ever told. Not because everyone won, they didn't. Not because it was fair, it wasn't. But because it happened at all. Because when the word went out that something extraordinary was possible, 300,000 people said, I'm going. That's it. That's the whole thing. That impulse to go, to try, to bet on yourself when everything is uncertain, that is the engine of this country. It has always been the engine of this country. James Marshall found a few flakes in a cold mountain river, and America went running. And what we built while we were running, California, the railroad, the economy, the century, that is the real story. That is what gets passed down. Not the gold that was found, the country that was built. Tonight as you sleep, just carry that with you. The idea that the chase matters, that the effort matters, that even the people who didn't find gold helped build something magnificent just by showing up and trying. You are the descendant of people who showed up and tried, who crossed oceans and mountains and deserts and didn't stop, who built this country out of nothing but ambition and will and the absolute unshakable belief that something better was possible. That belief, that is the real gold, and it has never run out. Good night, America. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America, the greatest country, the greatest story ever told.